Please join me in welcoming Andreas Weigend, who is now the director and founder of Social Data Lab.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, it's an honor for me to be here and to talk to you about the new data refineries, what we can do to transform big data into decisions. I've structured my time into 6 parts. I'll first talk about big data, and then I take you onto the journey Amazon took. Then the third point is that I'll explain to you the secret behind of all of that, which is understanding and writing down the equations of business. How we combine the data like in a recipe. The fourth point then is I'll take you into a deep dive where we look at the recommendations Thomas just mentioned and how those relate to the equations of the business. In the last part, I invite you to a thought experiment to flip in your organizations that what you now need permission for, namely to share something, that you will then need permission to not share. And I invite you to think about the implications of that, what it means for you, your customers, and your customers' customers. And then I end with an example of Google Glass and think about what it means, this O2O, this online to offline, if we had really big data weighted by the people. Remember Y2K? Today, in a single day, people are creating more data than mankind did from its very beginning until Y2K. Or we could also put it this way, last year, in 2012, people generated more data than mankind did from the beginning through 2010. But big data is not defined by the size. Big data is defined by a mindset. And what I want you to learn in this hour we have together is what that mindset of big data means for companies like Amazon. But in order to understand the future, let's go back into the past. The 70s were about building computers. You remember that? The 80s was about connecting computers. Some of you might recall. The other day, when I talked to my students at Stanford and told them how amazed I was when my advisor, my PhD advisor, gave me a terminal and a modem and said, you can log in 24/7. They said, what is a modem? So 80s, connecting computers. 90s, connecting pages. Very different. And that allowed for the search revolution. Namely, in this abundance of data which suddenly came online, the task had shifted from finding something to finding the most relevant version of it. So Google's PageRank, of course, being well known, of turning data into relevance, of using data for a purpose other than it was initially intended, how the links were between pages. 2000s, connecting people. Facebook, of course, as an example here, where now it is yet another level of abstraction where people are connected. What can we learn from that for communication? And then the 2010s, no surprise to you, is about connecting data. Now, for me, what matters is the decisions people base on data. So it's not about insights or actionable insights even. It's about the action you take. So as you're observing what your customers are doing with the software you might be providing, what matters is actually what actions do you take? Being a consumer guy and looking at the world, this big data revolution has reached 1 billion people. If you think about it, Amazon has changed the way 1 billion people think about what they buy and buy it in different ways from before. Google has changed the way 1 billion people think about information. Think what that means for teaching, for education, that just learning stuff is no longer the notion of literacy we want to have. It clearly is different because you can look up everything. So, including data literacy, just getting data to people is not all there is to it. But knowing what is correct, what could be correct, and what is clearly not correct is a very new kind of literacy, of information literacy. And Facebook has changed the way, I would say, 1 billion people think about who they are and how they relate to others. So, this talk here is not about the permissible. It's about the possible. And I want to give you some examples here about the possible. For this example, namely the mindset to turn mess into meaning. That is my definition of big data. And here's an example of these big data, which is just my geolocation data as Google knows them. So that is pretty useless, pretty messy. However, if you render it in a good way, it tells you here where I went for dinner last night. Or, if I look at the last week, it tells you pretty much where I live. You can figure out where I work. And you can also figure out where I eat. Because the food is free and good at Facebook and at Google. So now I would like to invite you to think. If you had your own geolocation data 24/7 for the last 10 years, available just like I have it through Google here, what would you do with it? Now, what about if you had your partner's geolocation data available? What about if they had yours available? Would that change your behavior? Maybe sometimes. Now, what about your competitor? If your competitor had access to your data, what would they do with it? So this simple data source, which is obvious that the carriers, for instance, got to have it, because if you don't know where my phone is, then you can't talk to my phone won't ring. Or another example of this give to get is GPS. So in order to get the service that we probably all use, Google Maps and Google Navigator, Google needs to know where I am. Otherwise, it can't tell me, turn left, followed by turn left. So what used to be complicated models we built, B2B models. When I was at Xerox PARC, we had connection machines, trying to figure out whether the traffic on 101 or on 280 would be better between Palo Alto and San Francisco. We had models where we modeled fluid dynamics, turbulent flow, laminar flow, and all of that. No need anymore. You just observe how some of the cars are moving. So we replaced complicated algorithms by simply looking at data. So when you use Google Maps, and there are these red lines, typically at the time of the day when you want to go somewhere, where do these come from? They just simply come from cars moving. And so Google, and there are other companies, Inrix, for instance, Microsoft spin up in Seattle, they observe this and they help you make a better decision based on the data you create and based on the data many others created. Give to get, helping people make better decisions based on the data, based on social data. The question now is, of course, that of monetization. And here's a slide of Jeff Bezos, who made the point that Amazon wants to make money when people use the devices, not when they buy the devices. So I would like to invite you for a second thought experiment. If you had access and all was legal to all the data flowing through your systems, your customer systems, that could include also your customers' data. Just assume for a moment that there was no restriction for you to actually look at those data. What amazing service would you build out of that? Is there any irresistible product you could create if you had access to all of those data? You come from different industries, so different ones of you have different answers. But I bet that in some cases, you could build pretty amazing things, just like the example of geolocation allowed us to actually build pretty good navigation which take the current situation into account. Inrix is that company that Microsoft spin out in Seattle. They have about 100 million people worldwide who contribute data in real time. Most of them don't know it. For instance, if you have a BMW, the BMW automatically reports geolocation to Inrix. Or if you use a Garmin device, the Garmin device reports its geolocation to Inrix. And based on that, they have customers you might not expect. For instance, Wall Street. Because given the traffic into the parking lot of big box retailers and comparing that to the year before, allows them to make pretty good predictions of what's going to happen with the stock price. So the lesson from this one is here, think about if you had access to the data. What irresistible product would you build? Because my belief is, if you actually come up with something like that, like the Navigator, then regulation will follow, because if it's irresistible, then people can't resist it. Examples for that would be Gmail, or many of the Google services, which are free. And Google makes money when other people pay for it, namely advertisers. So since we are in Vegas here, I was actually reflecting on business models. And I think it's not that complicated. There are just a few basic business models. So first of all, there are the gamblers. Gamblers are people who sell risk. And if they're in New York on Wall Street, then how does it go? If they make money, they get to keep it. And if they lose money, we all pay for them. That's the first business model, gamblers. Third ones are drug dealers. People who sell a product people really want. Fifth ones are maybe professors, people who sell a vision of the future. And then the sixth one are publishers, people who have zero incremental cost, or pornographers. And it's super interesting. I just read in the Times how the business model is changing. Because we live in a world where distribution has become distributed and essentially free. Because we live in a world of the BitTorrents of the world where you can find anything you want. Porn isn't lucrative anymore. So I've read that a top 100 site worldwide, top 100 website, Live Jasmine, has, I think, 20-something million unique users in the United States every month. And don't worry, I won't ask you who has been there of you. But how it works is that basically it is just a communication platform where you pay $2 a minute, $2 a minute for somebody on the other side to take their clothes off. Now what's interesting about this is how the power differential has shifted. Because, you know, there are very different things associated with this, with the scale. And the story the Times had is that that lady actually took her clothes off in front of a person who was her boss, who then fired her. So in any case, basically there are a few business models that depends on how you're making money, what you are selling. But let's go back here from Vegas to Amazon. And I want to ask here the journey of Amazon, what changed. Example here is that we, of course, have mobile, and that notion of mobile first is actually a deep design notion which any consumer product by now should have. In this case, you can scan a barcode and you can also snap a picture. Why would Amazon do that? On the surface, of course, to help you discover items, maybe to sell stuff to you. But much more importantly, there's a deep structure about the data strategy, and that's how it goes. Let's say you're taking a picture of that bottle of wine we had yesterday. Now, Amazon knows who you are because you're logged in. Amazon knows where you are because at least the EXIF might have information, or you even have your GPS on the phone. Amazon knows for sure that you're interested in that bottle of wine, otherwise why would you bother? Amazon also knows that that restaurant where you are actually has that bottle of wine. And Amazon gets a typically okay-ish picture of that bottle of wine. Certainly more representative of other people's pictures of that bottle of wine than the beautiful one which a photographer takes in the studio. So the data Amazon has about products rapidly gets better, and if it's not sure and it offers you, well, do you mean this one or do you mean that one? Then you actually help debug, clean up the data that Amazon has. So that is something which has changed over the time scale of, say, 10 years. There was no mobile first. Another thing that has changed is the focus from algorithms to data. And sometimes I say we move from AI. Some people say it's about artificial intelligence. I think it's about algorithm intelligence, to BI, business intelligence, and then to CI. Now, CI, many of you know as customer intelligence, and you probably think about it as intelligence about the customer. But for us, it is intelligence by the customer. Just like in the example of snatching that picture of the label, that the customers help you clean up your data. Say there are 100 experts who are responsible for product descriptions. There are roughly 100,000 people who work at Amazon and roughly 100 million users of Amazon. So that factor of 1,000, from 100 to 100,000, and another factor of 1,000, from 100,000 to 100 million. That is what actually cannot be replaced by algorithms. That's what people actually do. All you have to do is set up the incentives so they actually do it for you. Thus, CI, intelligence by your customers. DI then is decision intelligence or data intelligence, which helps you figure out from data what to do. So those are things which have changed. What has not changed is the mindset in the company. Jeff always says, ask for forgiveness. Don't ask for permission. And there's actually the Just Do It award, which he gives out every few months. And it consists of a tennis shoe, a Nike tennis shoe, which says, Just Do It as the logo. And that's given to somebody who did the wrong thing by the books, but the right thing for the company. So by incentivizing that behavior of saying, we know you violated the rules, but the rules were bad, and you did the right thing, and we want that mindset, particularly when it comes to data, to propagate, is one, I think, of the things which how that culture of innovation happened there. There's another award called the Government Award, which is sort of the opposite. and you get a television set, which is a long story why it's a television set, but you also get a handshake and the best wishes for your future endeavors, wherever they might be. That's for people who exactly followed the rules, but it's the wrong thing. Example, call center. Somebody calls and says, I just ordered those pots and pans yesterday, and I saw they are 10% discounted today. Can I get the discount? Agent says, well, you can send them back, and you can order the new one, and you get the discount. There's 2 steps which could be removed in this one, but that's what you get the government award for. So here are examples of the culture of a company, which really is probably very different from some of the companies you are in. So when somebody tells me, oh, I'm just doing my job, then that's usually the flag that they're actually not doing their job in that sense. The other thing that has not changed at Amazon is the true customer centricity. And I want to actually dive in a bit here and give you an example for this customer centricity. And I want to frame it, and that is the third point of my talk here, as the equation of your business. This point is always harder to understand than I think, so I'll take a little time because I think it's really super relevant for what you do. So the strategy of Amazon is not sort of mission, vision, values, but it is written down as an equation with many terms. There are hundreds of terms in that equation. So, for example, I just mentioned somebody calling the call center. If you call the call center for a second time about an item, then it's not clear whether you're just an unreasonable customer or whether the first agent didn't get it, did a poor job, whatever. So we instrumented the call center that in the case that there's a second call about a case, the second call center agent needs to figure out whether it is you who is not a reasonable customer, and we basically should fire you as a customer, or whether it is the call center agent who just wasn't performing well. So it's engineered into the system that rather than saying each call is $14, which is a traditional way of accounting for call center, you say, well, if the customer was wrong, we shouldn't actually have it as a cost in our equation. On the other hand, if the call center agent was wrong, it's way more expensive than 2 times $14. It's probably $400 because that customer will tell his friends and how lousy the call center is and how lousy the service is, and that's something we are proud of. We can't allow for that. So putting weights into these various and sundry terms in that recipe, just like in this recipe I have here, where somebody has certain ingredients and they put in 4 eggs and they put in 2 tablespoons of sugar. Maybe for somebody else that's too sweet, so they would change it. So think about how can you write down the various parts that make your business strategy explicit, making the implicit parts explicit, and then engineer towards that equation. So you all have many different data sources, but the point I want to make is try to combine them in one equation and then try to understand what the effects are if you brutally optimize for that equation. Now, there's something which Amazon and others call the scientific method, which is once you have agreed on the equation, you go out and do experiments. So you change things, like you change the amount of sugar in the recipe, and you figure out in that equation, does it make you happier? Does it taste better? And there's this interesting dimension of time scale. It might taste better, but if you have too many of this and you need to worry about how do you get rid of this extra couple of pounds you gained, then the long-term effect might be different from the short-term effect. So as you construct those equations for business, I invite you to think about different time scales. Some things are awesome on the short time scale, but will hurt you in the long-term scale. And think about the trade-offs you make. So making it explicit has the advantage that you are going to think about what are the trade-offs, and you knowingly and willingly make those trade-offs. In Amazon's case, we always try to model the delight of the user. And to the degree that we got that correct, we did the right thing, and sometimes we made mistakes, and we fixed them. So you can think about data as the raw material that gets combined into this equation, if you will, cooked or something like that, and then you know from the end result whether you like it or not, and you have different experiments, and that scientific method is at the essence of the innovation that Amazon, but also Google, Facebook have. Okay, so where are we here? We said, first, we want to help people make better decisions. We need to find what is better, and we write down an equation that approximates the delight of the user. Second, we can now run experiments because we know what's going well and what's doing poorly. So what I want to extract from that is we didn't start with the data. We didn't say, gee, we are sitting on this mountain of data. What can we do to get to actionable insights? But we said, let's start with the model of the customer. Let's vary things, and then let's figure out whether the way we varied it makes sense or whether we should go back to the old one. I ran hundreds of experiments at Amazon, and pretty much every feature you see on the site is a result of some experiment. I want now to do the promised deep dive into recommendations, and specifically, I want to show you how Amazon managed to keep it simple with the help of data. So not featureitis here, but how data helped Amazon once we wrote down the equations of business to delight the customer, how the different data sources worked together to allow people what most of you know as recommendations. 5 stages. The first stage of recommendations was manual. You had experts, merchandisers who know that that shirt would go well with those pants. Doesn't scale. Second stage, implicit data. Implicit are the data that you need to give to Amazon whether you want it or not. For instance, clicks. For instance, search terms. Because how could poor Amazon show you what you want to see if you're not sharing what it is that you want to see? So just as with geolocation, it's not that they're trying to extract clandestinely some data from you, they're sniffing your digital exhaust. No, you're very clear that you need to click on an item in order to get more details, or you need to search for an item in order to get that. That we call implicit data. Basically, it's a huge matrix, product by product matrix. You increment Aij by 1 when a certain customer clicks on item I and on item J within a session. And all these questions about privacy are irrelevant there because it totally doesn't matter who that customer was who clicked on that item I and item J in the same session. Equally well, it's impossible to delete data from that matrix precisely because these all enter anonymously, people click on X, also click on Y. We don't know what to take out anymore. So the privacy discussion is something maybe we can leave for the discussion. In some cases, really misunderstood, and the economics of what people would love to have, sort of naively, romantically thinking about the past. Nostalgia isn't what it used to be. That certainly doesn't apply here. Third point is explicit data. And that means that people write reviews. Now that is interesting, that Amazon very early on allowed people to write to the website. Wow. All these brand freaks who talk about control, think Apple, And Amazon just said, hey, be my guest. Write something on the page. And we did analysis, again, through experiment, and we figured out that if we remove reviews, that on average, the first review makes Amazon $30. Just the fact that somebody has reviewed the item, even if it's a negative review, actually it's a good thing for Amazon because people feel they can trust the site. Somebody says this item sucks, but let's see what other items could I be looking at. And that, of course, goes to number 2, through the implicit data. 4, situation. So I told you that mobile first is the design principle from the last few years. And that means that you have so much data about the situation somebody is in available now. For example, in this room, there are probably 10,000 sensors in this room. I was teaching in China last week, and they said, no, not that many, because they thought it was meant with a C at the beginning. What I mean, sensors with an S initially. And if you think about audio print, what a rich audio print we can create. And I think we do think a lot about images. We don't think enough yet about how powerful it is just to have the microphone on 24/7. So understanding the situation, what was secret 20 years ago? The CIA only had access to, under clearance, certain lie detectors you now can buy for 99 cents in the App Store. So that's situational modeling, which you use for political prisoners. Now we can use in our conversation with our friends. And I'll get to Google Glass in the next point. But when I ask my students, what do you think will be different in 2020, not that far away? And they said, oh, we are sure that in a conversation, we know not only about our emotional state, which we can recall whenever we want it, but we also know about the emotional state of the other side. Because they're hooked up with sensors, and the phone is a good starting point. We often hold our phone in our hand. We can think about many things that will be reality in 2020 in terms of data and situation. Let me tell you about a company I'm advising, Bay Sensors. Yes. And it's a Palo Alto-based company. They have cameras. If you walk through University Ave or California Ave, pretty much every shop has an outward-facing camera. B2B play, let's say Dunkin' Donuts. Dunkin' Donuts actually runs real-time experiments in Palo Alto by changing their message. Buy 2, get 1 free. The camera pick up what is the footfall, how many people are walking by that store, and how many people are actually coming in. The other message would be 30% off. That, of course, depends on the weather conditions, what have you, but those don't matter because it is real-time measurement how the messages that Dunkin' Donuts tries out actually work in a given situation at a given place. So there's no expectation of privacy from a shop with a camera to the outside. Now, they of course do more than that. Namely, they try to face recognize people, and the people who did the technology, they did like.com before, which was sold to Google, came out of Stanford Computer Science, and they at least know the gender roughly, the race, and maybe roughly the age of the person, so they can actually figure out, does this message appeal more to Asian girls or to white guys? Then most people in Palo Alto have a smartphone, which has, of course, a MAC address, the Wi-Fi. They sniff the Wi-Fi. While we are at it, might as well sniff the Wi-Fi. And it's now, as you go inside the store, you have about 1 square meter of accuracy, of knowing how long the person is where, based on just a couple of standard hardware routers, Wi-Fi routers, which figure out with triangulation where the phone is. Person comes the next time, and yeah, you spent time with the bras at Victoria's Secret last time. We have some new items in stock for you. What do you think about that? So that is all examples of the situation. The last point is that of the social graph. So when I said mobile first has been the design principle of the last years, and you probably have all heard that, I think it has been replaced by social first. I think social is more powerful, at least for the decisions people make, than mobile. Example could be the decision of where you are staying. Who of you has heard about Airbnb? Okay, almost everybody. So Airbnb is an example of the shift in mindset, how we have moved from hotel reaching an audience to actually something, a company, Airbnb here, where you rent a room from an individual that is connected to other individuals. And there are more rooms that Airbnb is offering a night than the entire Marriott group taking all properties together. So again, just like 1 billion people, Amazon, Google, Facebook, it is not an edge phenomenon anymore. Underlying, of course, of this is identity. You might remember this one, that on the internet, nobody knows you're a dog, was the saying 20 years ago. And I would say, it's just a slight shift, that now, on the internet, everybody knows you're a dog. Third thought experiment, which actually was done by J.P. Rangaswamy when he was chief scientist at BT, at British Telecom. BT, service organization, lots of emails. And JP was annoyed about all that bickering that he got from various and sundry people who were reporting to him, or reporting to people reporting to him, or reporting to people reporting to people reporting to him. So he declared that starting next month, all emails sent from BT accounts to me will be visible for everybody within the organization. Some people quit, and all the bickering stopped. So I would like to invite you to think that you could flip that default from, by default, which is the case now, only I or me and my assistant are reading the message, to, by default, everybody can read the message. I mean, most of the messages are not worth reading, I assure you that. But maybe just to think about what that might mean for your organization. Push it one level further, because we started saying if all the data that are flowing through your wires, if all the data was available for you, what amazing product, what irresistible product could you create? So whatever that is, it is clear to me that identity will play a key part. So we have seen business models shift from non-social business models, like Craigslist, to social business models. Airbnb is just one example. If I think about another parallel example, taxis. As you know, taxis are never there when you need them. So a whole host of companies have emerged, Uber with a 3 billion valuation being the prime example, to realize that taxis essentially are an information business. Now, in this connected world, we of course know where every taxi is. If you get people to now coordinate, then you have something like Addison Lee in London, where they don't rely on many other things but their own data to understand how traffic is going. And if you as a customer say that it's late at night and you want to go to Outer Essex, then they find your driver who lives in Outer Essex. And that they computed saves them millions of dollars of fuel, of petrol as they call it over there, a year. But the consumption economy, the sharing economy here, the collaborative consumption as we call it, has actually shifted. That we now have individuals driving and giving other individuals a ride. Of course, the taxi commission is up in arms against this because they want to defend their medallions, but it's pretty much a question of time, like any data play is taking over any regulatory play. But you want to know who you're picking up if you're a taxi driver or if you're a Lyft driver or a sidecar driver. So as I use my phone, which is just beautiful because it knows where I am already, and just push a button, that guy knows my Facebook profile, has my picture in the car, and has my rating in the car. So you rate the driver, but also the driver rates you. So all of those things are data plays that at the very heart allow us to allocate our resources more efficiently. These are new markets, and it's about better matches. I was on the board of one of the dating apps, and I could tell many more stories about that dating also is about data and better matches. But what is so important here, this thought experiment of flipping the default. That, if you don't tell anybody who you're interested in, your friends aren't going to help you find somebody, meet somebody. But if the default is that they know who you click on, they know who you click with, then chances are you'll find somebody. Okay. We moved in our notion from identity from attribute-based, where a customer is described by a set of attributes, to a relationship-based node of identity. So to summarize, the e-commerce part here is 3 stages. From e-commerce, where the company was in the center, to me-commerce, where the individual was in the center, to we-commerce, where the relationships between individuals become in the center. Last point, Google Glass. No talk these days without Google Glass. I just read today that Intuit and Google are now having a partnership that as you're considering buying something, Glass will tell you what the balance is in your checking account. So we can come up with lots and lots of value propositions, some of them more irresistible than others for the end user. But for you, as service technology people, I want to show you this side, the other side, namely Google's side. It's an absolutely amazing idea that now everybody who is wearing Google Glass acts as a data collector for almighty Google. That not only do we measure out, not only our lives with tablespoons, but do we measure out what is on the shelves in the supermarket, but we also weigh it with our own interests, with our own attention. So Google now, it's a quantum leap to what Google has so far. Gets an image of the world where it knows like local heat maps for each shelf, what people are interested in. It, of course, forces more transparency and honesty, so that fish, which has been sitting sadly on that shelf for the last 5 days, is getting kind of hard for the person to believe that Google telling that the same fish was there for 5 days is still fresh fish. So we live in an amazing world. And the mindset underlying this here is give data to get data. The 2 questions I have for you is, do your customers and do their customers understand the value they get when they give data? If that's not the case, for instance, I don't know why do I need to enter my email address when I want to get free access to the Wi-Fi here, then slowly you'll be in bad shape. And the other question is, does your product or service get better over time, improve with time, with data, or does it get worse? I showed you the example of Google Maps earlier on. And it's probably one of the best examples of how the gut reaction initially was, wow, somebody actually managed to break into Google Maps and is changing something, we need to plug that hole. But then that flip in mindset happened, that they realized, no, if somebody wants to help us, oh, of course, be our guest. Let's have not only about 1,000 people or so who go from shop to shop, ringing the bells as we speak, trying to get the information of the shop, help us, but let's have the 100 million people who use Google Maps help us. So we all can move things, we can all annotate the world we live in. So does your product or service get better over time, or does it get worse over time? Last slide. Here's how we'll summarize this talk. First, in this world of big data, start with the problem, not with the data. Start with a small problem. That's the best start for big data. Second, give data to get data. Third, the equations of business. Focus on metrics that matter to your customers, not your accountants or your lawyers. 4, focus on actions and feedback. Close that loop, not on analytics and stacks of reports. And 5th, and that's probably the one closest to my heart, let people do what people are good at, and computers do what computers are good at. Don't confuse the two. Thank you. No, just for now.
Thanks, Andreas. That was great.
JB, thank you.
I'm going to keep you out here for a minute or two. I'm sure you understand the implications of the things you heard in the last hour. In the B2B world, we talked about the power of the cloud and the consumerization of IT in ways like the cloud was going to allow the hosting of the technology to move from on-premise to off-premise, or the consumerization of IT was going to put different kinds of devices in the hands of workers, and maybe IT would lose control. We talked about the power of the cloud and the consumerization of IT like B2B companies. The power of the cloud and the power of the consumerization of IT is that for the first time ever, your companies are going to be connected directly to the customers. In real time, all the time, you're going to have the ability to have data in a way that you've never had before. B2B companies always think about collecting data that's good for them, that helps them cut their costs, improve their service. I think the B2C companies have learned to collect data to help the customer. And by the way, helping the customer lands up helping the company. So we talked yesterday in the B4B world about driving outcomes. We've never had visibility into those outcomes before. We don't know what the customers really did with the technology. We don't know that for this work group or that work group or this data center or that data center or this end user or that end user. We had no ability to execute the driving of customer success at scale because we didn't have the data and the connection to make that real and affordable. For the first time ever, we've got that opportunity. And we have to go study what customer success looks like so that we can recreate it at every single customer. So this ability to do the things that it's been almost a 20-year journey for Amazon and other consumer companies to learn how to take data and drive successful customer outcomes, right? We can't take 20 years. We've got to learn these lessons and begin to implement them right away. A lot of companies are starting to do that by trying to find data scientists. So my first question is, what is a data scientist? Where do you find them? How do you attract them? And what do you do with them once you got them?
Thank you. So data scientist is very different from the individual professions we had before. So I've taught in a number of departments. I've taught in statistics, where people are super good in really understanding significance of stuff, but on the web, everything is significant. So it's not really that is that important tool anymore. Model building, yes. I've taught in computer science, where people are great in worrying about algorithms, and they're good about handling data, but that by itself isn't good enough. So in short, a data scientist tends to be a curious person. So I sometimes think about them as data detectives. And let me, for instance, give you a story from Amazon, where I looked at how long does it take for people between first clicking at an item and eventually buying that item. And a little bit of script writing, and there it is. And I remember showing Jeff that slide, that histogram, because all I know to do is really count. And it was surprising that, drop, drop, drop. Of course, power laws, everything log, 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 straight line. But then there was a hump after 8 hours. So we thought, came up with hypotheses. Maybe people do it before they go to work and then they return to it at home. Maybe people actually do it before they go to bed. They want to sleep over it. None of that really explained that hump. And it turned out it was that some of the clocks were set in Seattle time, others were set on GMT, and that's an 8-hour difference. And of course, in the analysis, quickly threw out the negative times. How can somebody buy an item before if they looked at it? And then we were left with that artifact. So that's actually typical for a data scientist, that it's a dialogue with the data as opposed to that linear process people in statistics or in reporting or in accounting are used for. Another element is that you can always go out and get some other data. So in that case, you look at things and you're not sure. So, hey, why don't I run a little experiment on the side? And the third one is that I think data scientists have to be able to communicate the results. Because so many of the data points are wrong. Actually, most of the data points are wrong, which is very different from an accountant's worldview, who would be in prison, or the CEO would be in prison if that was the case. So that big, unclear mess of different attributes is what data science, I think, is about. Berkeley, and I'm starting my class on the social data revolution there next Tuesday, is starting to have a program, an online-only Master of Data Science, starting in January next year. So we've been done a lot of thinking about what it needs to do in order to educate people so they can become effective once they graduate and get into the organization.
So there's a lot of competition to attract these people, to provide the kind of insights that Amazon has about its customers. If we're trying to attract these people, and our competitors trying to attract them, and Google's trying to attract them, and everybody, how do we get them to choose us? What appeals to them to decide to go to work for my organization as opposed to somebody else's?
Yeah, good question, because those people basically have all the choices. And I think who they work with is important. And we always say in the Valley, everybody is a volunteer. You volunteer to work for me, I volunteer to pay you. So that attitude is very different from I'm assigning a task to you. I think it's a mindset which is best learned by hanging out with the students these days and see how they gravitate to interesting problems. Not to what you assign to them, but what they find interesting. difficult answer. Difficult question, difficult answer.
My other question is really around this shift. You can call it in the culture, you can call it whatever, but for many, many years, decision making inside B2B companies was made by the senior-most person, or the R&D guru, or the whatever. It was like the smartest guy in the room, or the guy with the highest rank, ultimately made the call. In these companies, it seems like understanding of the customer makes the decision. Understanding what makes the customer behave in a certain way, succeed. So it's the data and the analysis, it's the understanding of the customer that drives the decision, as opposed to the person, the smartest guy in the room, or the guy with the highest rank making the call. That's a huge change, right? It's like saying, the executives who say, I may not have guessed that, I may not even believe that, but if that's what we have to go do to drive the customer outcome, make them more successful, then by God, that's what we're going to go do. Does that transition, does that transformation of company culture come easily, or is it really, really hard? And how important is it that the source of truth for management decision making starts with the customer rather than our smartest engineer?
Actually, I think it's slightly different. It is that it's much easier to get agreement on the terms in the equation of the business. How much do you weigh if somebody sends an item back? Even the sign of some of these things, is it a good thing or a bad thing, right? Tony Shea, who actually Zappos is here, who I saw last week in Hawaii, Tony made that point 6 or 7 years ago when I first met him and said, Andreas, you're wrong. Sending something back doesn't mean it's a bad thing for the company. We have measured it, and we actually know it's a good thing. So sometimes agreeing on the equation, on the terms and the weights in front of the terms, is easier than once egos are vested in the outcome. So when I said step one is helping people make better decisions, that's pretty easy to get agreement on. If somebody says, I wanted us to pull the wool over customers' heads, doesn't go very well done. Then the second step is you try to quantify that. You write down that recipe, that equation of the business. And then anybody in the company basically can do experiments. So innovation happens at the bottom of the pyramid. That somebody sees something, gets a fraction of a percent of all customers. And then most of the cases, you have the most brilliant ideas, so tried, done. But then every now and then something bubbles up. And those are scripts which are written in all these companies. It's self-service, basically. And you then, after you do these experiments, you come up with the learnings. And then what really happens for the top management is trying to understand what actually has been learned. It's not about the green button versus the red button. There are deeper things. And that's, I think, what the role is, not just the data, but what's the equation, let people do the experiments, and then have the institutional learning.
Great. Great, Andreas. Thank you very much.